Okay, good morning, everyone. Continue enjoying and eating, and you can, feel free to get back up. I want to first thank our sponsor for today, Chaim Levy, who is sponsored in honor of the yahrzeit of his mother. Maybe you could tell us her name. Tamara Freda Bas Elimelech. Her neshama should have an aliyah, and I think the last Sunday of the year, to learn a little bit extra, to uplift each other, and to just push ourselves a little bit. It's to me, it's a personal chizuk to see you and to learn together. So, with that, let's continue. Let's start this year. I wanted to do something. I know I always try to pick controversial topics. Last week we spoke about hostage negotiations, so this is a little less emotionally charged, but I think it's very relevant. And I thought it'd be a good angle to sort of question. I like to question things, I like to poke holes in things. And I thought, what's this whole Simanim business? We're not Omens and I don't know if anyone's wearing a red band, but it's not. It's very questionable at best to do certain signs or certain let's say I know there's been someone who speaks to a Kabbalist regularly. I'm not going to say who, but we're not going to go into that specifically, but you'll see explicit mention. We're going to go through some Gemaras, explicit mention of certain things that are not allowed. So hopefully the people who go to the Kabbalists aren't doing this, but that I leave it to them because I'm not a Kabbalist, so they're going to have to tell me if what the Kabbalists say fits with this. But we start with the Gemara. The Gemara in Horius.
Maybe we should let the person who goes to the Kabbalist explain a little bit.
Oh,
the Kabbalist. No.
Okay, maybe, yeah. So let's first learn the Gemara, and then we'll see what you are not allowed to do, and then the person who goes to the Kabbalist may want to reveal himself or may not want to reveal himself, and time will tell if he feels comfortable.
The time might not be right.
And the time might not be right. Exactly. It's all. There are all magical powers that are beyond my understanding. So we'll see. So the Gemara in Horius, it's people say, it's a minhag to do the simanim, to have the apple and the honey and the rimon and the all these different things. I saw a very funny one. I was at someone's house years ago. I was a rabbinic intern in New Jersey, and they made up their own simanim. And it was like an hour long before we even started eating. So that was, I know I'm being recorded, but I'm not saying who it was. But hopefully they won't find out. And they had their own poem that they read. It was a whole ganza maisa. But one of the things they had is a raisin and a celery. And they said we should all have a raisin salary. So there's definitely other minhagim that came later. But actually this minhag is very unique in the sense that it goes all the way back to the Gemara. The Gemara in Horius Yud Beis, source number 1 on the source sheet. It tells us that Abai said, Simanim milsa he. Simanim is a thing. People say, that's a thing, or no, that's not a thing. Rabbi, is this a thing? Yes, it's a thing. It's a milsa. La'olam yehi ragil lemnechse bereish shata kara v'rubia karti v'silka v'tamre. So Abaye says that you should always begin the year on Rosh Hashanah with a squash, fenugreek, leeks, dates, all these things. He doesn't actually mention the apple and the honey, but he says these different signs at the beginning of the year. Now, what is the reason for this? He doesn't really say. The Shulchan Aruch codifies this in Tav Kuf Pei Gimel Sif Aleph, I believe, and he says here that there's some of the Yiratzons that we recite, some of the prayers that we say, right, by the Rimon, by the Rubia, right? He says, Sheyarbe Zilchiosenu Karti, Yichrasu, Sonenu, different types of prayers that we offer up, and he says this is the practice, and the Ramah tells us, Baruch Hashem, because the song that we all know, dip the apple in the honey, Yish Nogim Lecha Tapuach Matuk Bidvash, that it's a minhag to dip the apple in the honey, and or to have a sweet honey, a sweet apple. So this is really an age-old practice. But like I mentioned to you before, what exactly is behind this, and why is the Gemara saying we should do this? doesn't this seem to be like omens? Now, how do we know omens or signs are not a good thing? So this also we find explicitly in the Gemara. The Gemara in Chulin Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Beis tells us of a very interesting story. It says that Rav was going to visit Rav Chanan, his son-in-law. And to get to his son-in-law, he had to get onto a ship, a boat. I guess, it's always good to keep the in-laws at distance. I'm not sure if that applies to Toronto, but at least maybe a little bit of a distance. I love my in-laws. But, so he saw that the ferry was actually, the boat that he had to take, he was going to have to take a boat, and the boat actually was approaching him. And he said, wow, it's coming to me, Chazi mibara de ka'azi la'ape, amar mibara ka'azi la'ape, yom tova lago. That he said, today's going to be a good day. Today's going to be a good day. You ever have that day that, things are going nicely? Because he saw that the boat that he needed was coming towards him. So it's almost like you get to the bus stop, or you get to the train, or the subway, or whatever it is, and it's right there when you need it. Today's going to be a good day. Bear that in mind. That may be problematic, okay? So now he gets to, he goes over the river, and he gets to where he's going, and he goes and looks through the door, through the crack in the door. He sees that there's this piece of meat that is hanging, and he knocks on the door, and everyone comes out to greet him. Even the butcher comes out to greet him. And he tells them, by the way, this is, again, maybe, I don't know how many in-law jokes we can make, but this is, the father-in-law. That meat that you're going to make for your barbecue, it's treif. You can't eat that meat. And he says, if you would have eat that, if you would have fed that to your children, then you would have basically, or if you had eaten that meat, you would have fed forbidden meat to the sons of my daughter, or it's like you're not going to feed my daughter's kids that thing. So he's telling his son-in-law, this is not appropriate things to be giving my grandchildren. However, it says here that he didn't take his eyes off of that piece of meat, which is important, because the Gemara is pointing out that he didn't think there was proper supervision over that meat, but he himself made sure that he was watching that meat to make sure that it was kosher. But nonetheless, the Gemara says, Lo achol rav mehu bisra. He did not eat from that meat. So the Gemara wants to know, if he tells them, you got to shape up, you got to watch your meat better. He was the one who made sure that it was kosher, but he told them, to teach them a lesson, they have to, be more careful with their meat. But he still doesn't eat it. So the Gemara wants to know, why didn't he eat it? If you tell me because it was hidden from him, he was the one who saw it. So it wasn't hidden from him. Right, we say basar shenis alim, or food that leaves this is why some people have the requirement nowadays. Conscious organizations have something called a mashkiach tamid, which is a mashkiach who comes in and out and makes sure that there's always someone who's watching the meat, or that's why they have seals on the food. But the Gemara says, well, what do you mean? He was the one who looked through the crack and was able to see it. So obviously it can't be that he thought it was treif. He was just telling his kids and his grandkids, you got to be more careful with what you're eating. But the Gemara says, no, it can't be that. Rather, Ella din nachish. It's because he was divining. He was doing some sort of sorcery. Nichush. What was he doing? He was the one who was sort of, he noticed that he made a mistake. He was looking at the boat and saying, the boat came, it's going to be a good day. So he was sort of punishing himself to sort of recognize the fact that he made a mistake. The Gemara says, but how could that be? Rav, doesn't Rav himself say, Kol nachash she'ena ke'eliezer eved Avram, uki Yonasan ben Shaul ena nichush? Well, we're going to see it soon that there are certain signs that are given that are in Tanakh that Eliezer eved Avram does and Yonasan ben Shaul does, and doesn't Rav say that any sort of dividing that is not like that is permitted? It's not considered nichush. So the Gemara says, no, ela su'udas harishus havoi v'rav lo mesani misudas harishus. Rather, he just didn't want to eat from it because it was some sort of optional feast, and he'd rather be involved with a mitzvah as opposed to eating from a Suda Harishus. But what do we see from this Gemara? That somehow Eliezer ben Eved Avram, which is a story we're familiar with, he wants to go find a match for Yitzchak, a shidduch for Yitzchak, and he has certain signs that he does, right? He says, if she comes and offers the camels to drink, right, or if he offers me drink, and then she, then I'm going to see that this is the right match for me, Yitzchak. So the Gemara actually seems to be saying that is nichush, that is forbidden. And it's similarly by Yonasan ben Uziel, ben Shaul. He did some sort of omen whether or not he and his arm bearers would defeat the Philistines, and he has some sort of signs. So aren't those people apparently tzaddikim? Aren't they people who the Torah seems to, the Torah recounts the whole story with Eliezer Eved Avram, and that we learn about the virtues of Eliezer and obviously Yonas and Ben Shaul. So why is the Gemara using them as an example of something that's forbidden? So that's the question that the Rishonim trying to deal with. And the Ran, in source number 4, he quotes the Ravid who says it can't be. It can't be that this is, the Gemara was saying something that was forbidden because these are tzaddikim, and it can't be that they did such an avera as an Isser Da'araisa, a biblical prohibition of nichush. But the question that the Ran has on the Ravid is this doesn't make sense. The Gemara clearly uses Eliezer Eved Avram and Yonasan and Ben Shaul as examples of something which is forbidden. And then the Gemara changes, it says, it was some other reason that he was not eating, because it wasn't really a sign that he was just saying. He was just saying a general statement. It was a good day, but it wasn't like, if this happens, then I do this, or if this doesn't happen, I do that. So the Gemara clearly is using that example. Like, let's say Eliezer Eved Avram, he says, if she offers me drink and she offers so then it's going to be a sign from Hashem that this is Yitzchak's mate. And if she doesn't, then it's not. So it's a very clear action plan based on the signs, and the Gemara seems to imply that would be forbidden. Yeah.
Would superstition fall into the same category?
Ayin hara or all these things? So it's a bigger...
Don't walk in front of a black cat, or I was just saying all these superstitions.
Yeah, I think, it's a little bit of a different... I don't say a little bit, it's within the same genre, but it's a different category, because we're specifically talking about someone who says, I'm going to throw this ball against the wall. If it bounces back and reaches this side, then I know that I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to go to the grocery store. But if the ball bounces back against this wall and doesn't reach this wall, then I'm not going to go to the grocery store. So it's like using signs. It's a little bit different than superstitious, but you could group together the people who usually do that with the people who may not want to, walk in front of a black cat or all these different things. But I would say it's a little bit different. So, but the question is, how could we say that Eliezer Eved Avram was doing something that's usher? So, very interesting. The Ran tells us, I'm not going to, just for time's sake, I won't read the whole thing inside. The Ran has a fascinating explanation of why Eliezer Eved Avram and Yonasan ben Shaul are actually not in violation of nichush, but they're examples of what would be. So, he explains like this. If we do signs, like I said to you before, if I throw a ball against the wall and I say, well, if the ball bounces back against this wall, I'm going to go to the grocery store. That is exactly what Eliezer, that's like the mode or the type of sign in which he did. It was a very clear, if this happens, then I do that. That's forbidden. Why was Eliezer Avram allowed to do that? Why was the Torah seemingly giving us, there was no indication that what he did was wrong? Because what Eliezer Eved Avram was doing was something which b'derech hateva makes sense. Why? Because he's looking for a match for Yitzchak. He's looking for good midos. He's looking for someone who's going to give him to drink, give him some food, give his animals, right? So that is something, yes, he's looking for a sign, but the sign, b'derech hateva, is a logical thing. Right? The lashon of he says, the Asr Torah, b'tirutzin shel dvarim, jenachas Asr Torah, he hatola es devarav b'simin, she'ein hasvara no senes. That the Isser is to make your actions dependent on something which logically makes no sense. I'm going to go to the grocery store if the ball gets back here. Or I'm not going to go to the grocery store. There's no connection between the ball bouncing and what I'm going to do. That's forbidden. But Eliezer Eved Avram, his simin was something which makes sense, misvara. That if she's going to give me to drink, it seems like she's a good girl, a fine match for Yitzchak. So that's how he solves the problem with the Gemara using Eliezer Avram and Yonasan ben Shaul. He has this whole explanation of Yonasan ben Shaul and his sign, how that was misvar. I'm not going to get into that right now. But the point is that if you make your actions dependent on a sign which is illogical, that's forbidden. If you make your actions dependent on a sign which, even if it's a sign, quote unquote, which is logical, that's fine. Because it's not really a sign. It's not like you're just looking for these superstitious or whatever you want to call it, messages from God. It's actually a logical thing, which is misvara. So, what do we see from this Gemara? Seemingly, something which has no logical bearing on our year, right? If you eat a bunch of pomegranate seeds, a lot of them, I don't know if you're going to have a better year. Probably not. Or if you have a date, or you have a fenugreek or whatever it is, it doesn't have any bearing misvara on your year. So according to the rules delineated by the Ran, understanding the Gemara in Chulin, it doesn't seem to make sense. What is the reason that we are allowed to, not only we are told that in the Gemara they did it, but how are we even allowed to do it? So that seems to be a problem. Now I want to just tell you a little bit of what the problem with nichush is. Like, it sounds like, well, okay, so this thing the Torah tells us to do, this thing not, like, what? So I just found a good explanation from Rav Shamshon Hirsch. He says, why is the word nichush similar to the word nachash, like a snake? Right, that's what the Torah refers to it in a number of places. One place is when Yosef, who's still pretending to be the viceroy, and they steal the cup, and they place the cup on Binyamin. So when they find the cup, he says, "1 second, this is the cup of the viceroy." And halozeh asher yishte adoni bo v'hu nachesh yinachesh bo hariosam misharat sisam. He divines or he does sorcery with this cup. So the Gemara, that's one place, not the Gemara. The Torah tells us there, and then also the Torah tells us that it's referring to different prohibitions, kishuv, magic. It uses the word nichush, menachesh, as some sort of forbidden divining or sorcery. So why is it using this word? So Rav Shamshon Hirsch has a beautiful explanation of why it's called nichush. And it explains a little bit what the Torah's issue with it is. He says that a person who uses hidden magic arts in source number 7, so they say, right, you should be afraid, is what the people are telling the Shvatim. You should be afraid. You're tampering with something that he does sorcery with. He says the reason for this is you're trying to achieve your purpose directly without having to overcome the natural intermediate obstacles. So that's called nichush, because he says it's like sort of like a snake slithers. It's trying to get like a little bit around, try to cut the corner or try to slither through life as opposed to plowing through and getting through in the straight path. He has a formulation here. As soon as we believe that we can do something to affect our fate other than by being good, right? That's really what this comes down to. The Torah wants us to be good. The Torah wants us to do good things, not try to, do things and avoid being good, but try to get a good fate. Have to be afraid, or have to be afraid of something else other than doing wrong, right? Don't be afraid of the black cat that's walking on the street. If you're doing good things, it's going to be good. If you're doing bad things, it's going to be bad. Don't try to circumvent your fate through these other means. That's why that's what he says. We are at once at danger of becoming bad, omitting being good on account of nichush, or doing bad, trusting to nichush. Then we no longer weigh our actions on the scales of the Torah, cease to do that which we ought to do, because we believe we can do something else to obtain our objects. And that's what I think a fundamental issue with a lot of these segulos or adopt a kollel. All these things. I'm not saying that's not it's a problem. It's a good thing to give tzedakah. But I think what rubs me the wrong way in a number of publications is they say, make sure you have a good year, do this, or do that. Yes, those are good things to do. But we need to make sure we're doing good and not trying to circumvent the bad things that we do. Oh, yeah. Listen, I'm not going to work on that, but like I give a lot of tzedakah, or I do this incantation, or I wear this string, and now I'm good. Like that's exactly the issue with this. So that's what Rav Hirsch is saying. So that begs the question again. Further, Rav Hirsch doesn't address this, but again, the Simanim seem completely within that realm of just trying to circumvent being good by just eating things that have words that sound like things that are good. So it's like it's a similar thing that like to get a raise in salary. Well, maybe instead of eating a raise in on a salary, you should do a better job at your job. Oh, okay. So but I'm not blaming those people because that's what it seems like the Simanim are. So this is why I felt we really need to understand the Simanim. So I have three mahalchim, three approaches to the question. I don't know if any will really resonate. I try my best to find some good answers. Often the questions are better than the answers. But I found a couple of answers which may or may not speak to you, but we'll see. This is what the traditional sources say. So we have approach number one is the Maharal. The Maharal has a fascinating explanation where he really, this is in Chidushei Agados of the Maharal on Horius. He says something really interesting. He ties into all the different Simanim into what he calls Zechus Avos. He says, really, if you take a look, I bolded some of it. He says, Ein adavar rak shehu simin tov b'shah shiroi el zeh. It's not just like a simin tov. Ani omer ki elu devarim niskaru behen zechus avos. That each and every one of the simanim has some level of a reference to or a hint to the avos. And he goes through them. You can take a look at what he says. He says, number one, he says that Kara pri gadol me'od v'zeu siman la'avram. Because it says in Yoshua ha'adam ha'gadol ba'nakim, somehow that's a reference to Avram. Rubia is a siman li'yitzchak. V'harbesia saracha, that the Torah says about Yitzchak, he's gonna have many children, he's gonna have Yitzchak. Because Yitzchak is gonna come bracha into the world. And then he has connections with Yaakov is the Karti, ki sarisa im elokim v'manashim batuchal, that you overcome your enemies, and that's what the Karti says. And then in the Maharal, Horius, source number 8, he says, Tzadikim are like a tamar, because tzadik ketamar yifrach. But he tries to basically downplay the idea of the siman being like it's indicative of, if you eat this apple and the honey, you get a good year. He's rather saying that it's just something that we're reminding Hashem of. We have good yichus. We have the best yichus. We have Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So entering into Rosh Hashanah, mentioning Zechus Avos, that is. I think at another time we spoke about Zechus Avos together. We learned about it. How does this make any sense, right? We're using protexia. We're using our pulling strings to try to because my father, because you should have met my grandfather. Like, what does that have to do with anything? So, without getting into all the details of that whole discussion, Zechus Avos is a well-founded tradition. One of the explanations that, is that we inherited some of their spiritual DNA. Whatever the explanation of Zechus Avos is, it's not about Simanim being an omen, but rather it's about awakening divine justice by reminding Hashem of Zechus Avos. That's the Maharal. Okay, I found the Maharsha. The Maharsha, I think, is the simplest, most straightforward answer that, for me, I think is the most pashut shot answer. He says, very simple. The Gemara said that it's a siman tov if you eat these things. But the Gemara did not say, if you don't eat these things, it's going to be a bad year. So it's a half of the equation. So that's the Maharsha says. He says, Simanim, I'm very, at least, validated that he asked the question. So I feel like I'm not off base. He asked the question. He says, how could this not be nichush? So he says, because He's saying that the way Rashi explains it is that you eat these things and you have a good simin. So Shana Tova u'mituka v'i keperish Mordechai b'shem if you go like the Mordechai and the Tur, he says, because it's, here's the line. Ein bahem shum horal dilara'a havi iser mishum nichas. It doesn't mention anything about the bad side of the equation, and that would have been nichas. If you say, if you do eat this, it's good. If you don't eat that, then it's going to be bad. That's why it's not nichas. So and then he says basically that the whole point is to remember that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and actually, he doesn't say that, but I was thinking that maybe that could be an explanation of it. That the concept is good things come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's sort of like using these things to remind us that everything is from Hashem, but it's not gonna go the opposite direction, because as we mentioned before, that's just trying to play with some sort of avoiding trying to be good, and not actually being good ourselves. So that's what the Maharsha says, that it doesn't give the negative side of the equation, it just gives the positive side. Okay, one final approach from the Bnei Yissaschar. The Bnei Yissaschar, he has a Chassidish approach, very, very deep. I'm not sure if I fully understand it, but we'll try to learn it together. So he quotes from the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich, he says, well, if you go back to the creation of the world, we are told that Hashem created the world with 10 ma'amaros. And that's why the Torah says 10 times Vayomer. The problem is, and even the Gemara notes this, that it doesn't say Vayomer 10 times in the creation story, it actually only says it 9 times. So then it says, well, Bereshis is its own mimer. It's Amar Rabbanan Bereshis Nami mimer. I don't know why in a lot of these different Hasidic Sfarim they put the two chichiks, the two little dashes before the last letter of each word. I don't know why they do that sometimes. It's not an acronym. You know it's Bereshis it's not a Rosh Tevis, but sometimes they do that. I don't know if there's any reason for that. Maybe just a printer like to do it. I don't know. So he says, how could Bereshis be a mimer? It's not a mimer. It's not a statement. It's Bereshis. So he says that he quotes from the Maggid of Mezrich, that Rav Dov Ber of Mezrich. So he says, he explained, he's Rav HaKadosh Anal, Tihine mimer lo yitzur lanu ki im al yedei osios. V'hine ha'osios gam ki nivro ki mihechan nishavu. Halo Aleph Samach Beis Hey Hu Bara'am Malcolm Ve'adonam. So I'm not sure what that last part is saying. Again, I told you it's very deep Kabbalistic things. But one thing he does say is Bereshis is HaKadosh Baruch Hu was actually he created letters, because before that there was no letters. So what does it mean that he created letters? So the osios that he created is Bereshis bara Elokim es. What did he create? He created Aleph and Taf. Aleph and Taf are the alphabet. So the Bereshis mimer is actually before there were any words, so to speak, letters. Kaviyachal Hashem doesn't speak, but in order to speak, you need to have letters. There were no letters to create to have a mimer. So Bereshis was the first creation of the letters. Bereshis bara Elokim es. He created Aleph v'Taf. Okay, so Aleph v'Taf, right? It says, "Nemar Bereshis bara Elokim es hainu ha'osios min Aleph ad Taf v'F shali kasev." Beforehand, you couldn't have written this, so that's why you couldn't have said Vayomer. It says Bereshis bara Elokim es, because before that you don't have any way to have any articulation. So then he says something very interesting. So he says, "What is the Rosh Hashanah? Is the creation of the world." So we're going back to a period of time before there was any words, because it was before there were letters. So he says that's why we have the Simanim, because the Simanim, he says, were actually tfilos without any words. How do you have a tefillah without any words? You eat a siman. So that's what he says here. Reishis hamachashiv nikra simin b'li hislabshus b'dibor. It's some sort of communication that is not couched in any words. V'hinei sof ma'isa b'machshava tchila. First, right, it begins with an idea and then comes to an action. Al kain Simanim milsa. What does it mean? We started off with Simanim are a thing. He says this is yichud nifla b'chol shir komim b'ha'ala. It's called dvarim shorsham. It's some sort of very special thing that is get things back to their roots. Kol adinim ki ons v'ched b'mkomo b'zeh she'amer Abaye. This is going back to the strength of what it is. Before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's a very desirable thing. And this is what Abaye meant, that Simani Milsa. What does it mean that Simanim are a thing? Yehe adam ragil lechel b'reish shasa, that haschala is brias ha'olam, at the beginning of the creation of the world, tov ma'od, it's very good to be menatik misnakes as dinim, to I guess sweeten the din ayde simin, because a simin bali day dibor. A simin comes to some sort of idea of a dibor without any words. And that's what he taught. Tekiyah shofar is also a tefillah without any words, because the Shmuel kol shofar, and it's really haven hadvarim, the rochav lev, that it's really an internal understanding. So basically, what he's saying is that the simanim are a way for us to go back to the original creation of the world, where there were no words yet, because Hashem had not created the letters of the Aleph base. It's before Bereshis bara Elokim S. Hashem didn't create S, Aleph and Tav. And therefore, how do we have any tefillah without words? He says the answer is, you eat the siman. You eat the siman, and that's sort of a tefillah without words. I guess it's a good vart if you want to say it at the Rosh Hashanah table. And that's a shofar also. A shofar is sort of hayom haras olam. This is the day of the creation of the world. And why are we specifically doing something which is wordless prayer? Wordless prayer because we're going back to a state in which there were no words yet. I'm not sure if I understood all the different Kabbalistic notions that he mentioned, but that's the basic gist of the Bnei Yissaschar in the name of the Maggid of Mezrich. So we had three approaches. The Maharal said it's about Tzachos Avos. The Maharsha, although we kind of, I was missing part of the Maharsha, I don't know. I thought he talks about this, everything coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what he does say for sure in the piece that I found here is that it only has one half of the equation. If you'll eat this, it'll be a good year. That's not called a nichush. Right? That's not called nichush. It's not called a sign. If you do this, then that. If not, then you do this. And then we had the Bnei Yissaschar who told us that there's a special tefillah almost, a special prayer that the simanim are. It's like sort of an action, dibur without dibur. It's a prayer without words, because we're going back to the time before there were any words, during Hayom Haras Olam, before Hashem created letters. That's why Bereshis was a mimer, because it was a mimer without being a mimer. It was an utterance without an utterance, which was before Aleph and Taf, before the letters of the Aleph base. And then he mentioned also Tekiyah Shofar, going along the same theme, that there are certain tefillos that are not uttered actual prayers, but rather wordless prayers. And why would we have wordless prayers? So this is just my own thought. I think Rav Soloveitchik says something similar to this, that we speak a lot, we do a lot of tefillos, we have a lot to daven for, but sometimes we just feel like the words don't do enough for us. We don't know what we're supposed to say, we don't know what we should be davening for, who should they kill, and who should this be, and what should our year be? We don't know. If anything, we learned from this past year that we don't know really what's going to happen, and we should have that humility. And sometimes, yes, we daven, we use the words of the siddur, and it's important, and we should daven for having a good year, and we do use our words, but there's a certain point of humility that we just say, Hashem, I just want a good year. I'm just gonna say whatever is good for me. You know what's good for me. And I'm just going to eat this rimon to have the zechuyos. I'm just going to blow the shofar and hope to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that whatever is supposed to happen, happens. I'm not going to get involved in exactly how, what, this and that. I heard a funny joke from a rabbi who used to be a rabbi at Einstein Medical School. They have a rabbi because they have a whole community there. So he said that his mother always davened that he should be a doctor. So every year, he is invited, or he's no longer the rabbi there, he's now the rabbi somewhere else, but he said, I'm being vague because I don't know if he wants me to share this joke, but I thought it was very funny. But he said that every year they ask him to speak at the medical school graduation. So he said, my mother always prayed that I should be at a medical school graduation. But you have to be careful with what you daven for, because he's there at the medical school graduation every year, but he's not a doctor. So we should daven, we should use our words, but we should also have the humility to recognize that we just want a good year. We want all of Klal Yisrael to have a good year. And we don't know what that means exactly, but we eat the siman, and we blow the shofar, and we give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're in charge, you're the Melech, you're Avinu Malkeinu. You decide what's a good year for us, and with that, we eat the siman at the meal, and we blow the shofar to say, Hashem, you're in charge. You know, really, my words aren't going to do it, aren't going to suffice, and therefore we eat the siman with a wordless tefillah. Okay, everyone, thank you for coming, and it should be a schus and Aliyas Neshama for tomorrow Friday, Bas Elimelech, and it should be a schus everyone for a chasiva v'chasim tova and a good gebench diyar.